Alrighty. Good evening and great games at your table. I am Game Master J, Jonathan Albin, and this is Nycos RPG, Nycos Launchpad. And tonight I've got a few snippets I want to go over. I've got a little bit of a new twist on conversations about the veils I want to introduce and see how that goes over. And I also want to share some information with you on how we can actually start playing the Nycos RPG. Now, when I say play the Nycos RPG, in reality, I'm speaking of the concepts of Nycos RPG as Launchpad. And the reality is I want to kind of show you or demonstrate to you what I mean when I speak about role play as a life-changing experience, and to show how the Nycos Launchpad leads inexorably to the idea of actually playing the role of your life and playing the life in your role. So as we go into this, I'd love to get your input. If you like what you see, make sure you follow our channel. And if you want to know more information, of course, you can check with our other sites, which we will describe near the end. In particular, of course, becoming a member of our community through patreon.com/NycosRPG, or rather, /Nycos. Well, let's get into it, shall we? And so we're going to start talking a bit about the veils. And this series is going to be a comparative connection, showing you how the relationship between the veils exist and how they are perceived by each other. I'm going to start with one of the most of what you would think would be a diametrically opposed one, the concept of life versus nothingness, the idea of vitality versus purity. Now, the Viridians recognize that all things must end, but only in the light that they also therefore stir or trigger a new beginning. The Order of Nihilists, however, seeks to find the perfection at the end of all things, and they believe that their position should therefore, you would think, be the nemesis of the veil of Viridius, but it's not, as you'll see. So let's explore this odd conundrum. You see, the cycle of life in the nihilist standpoint must be necessary and repeat only until all beings that exist submit to the peace of nothingness. Until such time, they abide the Viridian viewpoint, because they at least acknowledge that there is an end to something, and seek rather to subvert those naive philosophers who hold to the idea that life must return, and guide these life-focused followers towards their own inevitable demise, thus fundamentally defeating the very purpose of being allies. Now, doing this has led to long talks and long knives, and aside from that, the Viridians and Nihilists both embrace the cost of life necessary for renewal and the peace that death provides. So at least they have that they share. Now, this creates odd bedfellows from time to time within culture and beyond the boundaries of the limits of the iterations, but we will go more into that in future episodes. Alrighty, so as we talk about playing a game together, what I'm endeavoring to talk about is the concept that as we progress through our lives, we change from time to time. I speak and have spoken on the concept of the transformation protocols, doing radical things like shaving your head or changing your facial hair or the color of your hair, the position in your life, the types of jobs we have. These are all places that we make transformation and we change our being. So we're going to talk today, therefore, about working at playing. Now I got to figure out which camera I'm looking at. Okay, there we go. So when we talk about working at playing, the idea here is that our life's work is fundamentally passing through the lives that we experience, learning how to cope and adapt to each one of them, embracing where we can those pieces of that life and making them our reality. And in other cases, learning how to let go and move beyond the things that have become so entrenched in our life as to become routine. The question then is, how is life a game? Most people, take life pretty seriously, and arguably as we get older, we're pretty much programmed by our families, our culture, and our clan, our cliques, and everything to really walk away from the playfulness of it and start to take it, very seriously. Well, I see life as a game, and the reason why I see life as a game is that I define a game pretty specifically. A game, by definition, is any interaction that occurs over a set amount of time with knowable interaction rules and a means by which we can resolve our differences through person versus person competition, communication, and connection. So when we go through this, we have to realize that our lives are all of these things. Our lives are certainly a limited engagement activity. We only live for a certain number of years. I particularly like the definition given by the group Rush, where they talk about learning that we're only immortal for a limited time. The idea is that while we are in our existence and while we are engaged in the very process of existence, we don't see our mortality. We do not see the end. And it isn't until we're out of those engagements and looking at it instead from the standpoint of what could have been or what might have been that we start to see our mortality. Because it's a limited engagement activity, it fits into the category that I gave for a definition of a game. The next thing is that it does engage a finite number of people. We certainly would like to think that we can know millions of people, but the reality is, while others may know of us individually, we individually can't know an infinite number of persons, and therefore we are engaging only with a finite number of those individuals. And it's that finite nature that again puts it in the concept of a game, because a game can only be played by a certain number of players. The next is that resources generally in games are expended or received, whether you're playing a game where you are accruing victory points, or you're accruing resources for trade, or accruing victory points. In all of these cases, these points are bought and sold, traded, communicated back and forth with each other. And that's the way real life is too. We have to generate revenue to pay our bills, to keep our livelihood. We have to expend our social capital to make friends and run the risks and become the vulnerable persons to create community and relationships. Furthermore, just as in any game, the very virtues of success or failure are themselves fleeting engagements. And whether we win or whether we lose, it isn't what we do or but it's how we play the game that matters. And that is certainly the case when we're looking at life. It isn't whether we win or lose, but it's how we play the game. And it depends very seriously on the interaction we have with others to see what their feedback and their input would be. And if we are engaged with the idea of a feedback loop, that is ultimately the essence of games, is that we are looking at our interaction with other spirits and other beings to determine our pecking order or our success level within the game. Now, the idea of an outcome being a win or a lose is subjective. There are persons who play games literally to see how badly they can do. They play to lose, or they play with the idea of no thought of risk, or they play with the concept of who has the most toys wins. These are all subjective boundaries for victory. And so just as in a board game or a role-play game being totally arbitrary on what is the win or lose condition, same thing is true with real life. We don't have a way of doing that. There's no objective judge who determines our success or failure. Of course, this can be argued in the case of religious affiliation, because of course in those cases there would be a deity that could be measured, but that person is, again, just like in a game, would be outside of the rules. They're not playing within the same framework. Now, they can be played solo. almost every game out there. You can find a solo version of just about every game. So you can either play solo or you can play with as large a team or a large group as possible. Sometimes games are set up to be played by hundreds of people. Think of the participation in like lottery and things like that. These are games and they're being played by millions of people, but the actual competition is limited because you simply can't deal with playing with the infinite again. So, but the most important part of this, and this is how it ties into Nycos RPG, and that is that, like RPGs, the game of life has no distinct winners or losers. They can be measured within the framework of the game. We, as the saying goes, we don't get to take it with us. We don't create a pile of loot that is our victory. Certainly, we could argue that that is our subjective victory, but it is not a. There's no definite checklist of what is a win or what is a loss. And the real key here is that the only way to win is to play. If you are going to participate in the world and you are going to reach any form of success, you have to have engaged. You have to have been part of the game. So now let's talk about how that game plays out. Alrighty, so we're going to talk about the introduction to role play. Now, those of you who have acknowledged that you're role players, you know what I'm speaking of. Role playing is the definition of it's the considering of actions and thoughts in an imagined reality that may or may not be similar to the one that we currently inhabit. In other words, you could play a role play game where you are literally playing somebody in another town doing exactly what you're doing in your real life, and just imagine how that outcome might be different. It's a marriage, if you will, of some physical reality with cultural influences and personal motivations that adjust by the player's will. And so when we speak of the Nycos Launchpad, what we're really talking about is a role-playing mechanism whereby you create the world and the persona and the reality that you want to engage with in your own life, and you play yourself into it by playing the role. Now, there are those that would look at what I'm saying and try to equate it to the, if you will, fake it till you make it aspect. Well, in this case, I'm acknowledging that we are not that person when we take on the role. We aren't. Instead, we are playing the role so that we become more familiar with it, so that when it comes to the time when we can step into it, we'll already have the skills and the affinity for that position should we get there. Let's see here. Interesting mythical. I'll answer that in a moment. The idea here is that therefore we want to look at a description of the life that you're wanting to acquire, the life that you envision for yourself, in terms of where we start now, establishing that persona, describing our place in the world, associating it with our current culture, and the description of the states, the estate, if you will, that we are attempting to achieve in this world. So I'm going to take a second here to answer the question. What do I think of the idea of a mechanical pill bug roly-poly with jet engines, acts like a living cannonball that uses its speed to... That sounds amazing. That sounds like a great monster element. I would ask where the engines developed. Are they biological or are they mechanical? Is this pill bug or roly-poly with jet engines, is it a construct? Could certainly be, especially if you take into account, for example, rotational velocity, that the jet engines take it to forward direction, and then the orbital rotation dissipates the heat over the friction over the nose, and therefore continues the acceleration process. That might be interesting. And for the attack or defense rolls, my biggest challenge with that has been the role play mechanism of games like Dungeons and Dragons, where the numbers become arbitrary because the agility... Okay, biomechanical. Oh, okay. Yeah, so why not? As a matter of fact, you can make it so that the launch velocity could be by an external, for example, a rail gun or whatever. If they're mechanical, they might be magnetic, and you could therefore fire them off of a rail cannon to give them higher velocity to start with. And that way, the rotational velocity would also help to dissipate the damage when they go in. Because that way, your impact, therefore, is rotational, and therefore you might have a magic bullet effect. Who knows? So when we talk about building the base using the Nycos mechanical system, you would have brilliance, cognizance, grace, presence, resilience, resolve, and ultimately a foundational value. Now these are numerics, and we utilize a percentile-based system, but it's hard when you're looking at a real life to balance these numbers or determine what they are. I mean, if you went to a straight brilliance, then you perhaps could use an IQ parameter or a SAT test or ACT. But all of these are sort of arbitrary and education related, whereas perhaps your brilliance might be in areas of observation or of analysis. And these things don't have a tangible measurement. So it becomes a matter of you as a participant to kind of do the hard work we've talked about in previous episodes about doing the hard work of determining what these numbers would be. Now, mechanically, from the standpoint of the actual NycosRPG game, generally these numbers are arbitrarily chosen to be somewhere between 25 and 55, with very few of them getting above that, at least initially. And that's because most of the time our lives are rather broad spectrum. We aren't necessarily only brilliance. We might also have some awareness or cognizance. We will certainly have at least some level of grace or whatever. But these numbers provide you with just a way of determining the base values. And in most cases, we don't actually role play these mechanisms because it's hard to play something that you're not. And so therefore, instead, we want to look at them almost like a graduated growth list. So these are the topographical points that we're going to build the landscape that is our life out of, if that makes sense. So when you're looking at your brilliance and you're looking at how clever or smart or intelligent you are, certainly you could use your level of graduation education wise as a numeric value, perhaps giving a multiplier for the number of quarters or seasons. And if you do that from a mechanical standpoint, if there are, say, 3 semesters a year, then you could take the numeric value for the number of years of schooling that you finished and multiply by 3 to come up with a arbitrary brilliance score. So if you were in school all the way through the end of high school, that'd be 12 years of education times 4, which would be 48, or times 3 at 36. But these, again, are just numbers for the purposes of description. They're not necessarily tangible. Same with cognizance. It's really hard to come up with a numeric value for how alert or aware you are. But if you can really think about how often you get surprised by things and how often you are, you'll discover things that you didn't know before, you can come up with a numeric value for these. But again, these are only in a way of describing the character. They're not necessarily a measure of your advancement or success. So let's go on to the next one, which is the idea of your place. And your place is going to be describing how your life has come to this point. Have you been exposed to the concept of beauty and how it is measured and how it is defined? Have you got a career that's dependent upon your duty? For instance, university professors and school teachers and doctors and professional sports. These are all ways of having an obligation or a duty that you have dedicated your life to. Perhaps instead you've dedicated your life to being compassionate to others, and therefore you might have a higher heart score or whatever, or mind, how much schooling have you had, and how much development of your mental capacity have you worked with. What about your social culture? How far up in the social standings are you? And how many things you have? What kind of blessings have you had in those areas? All of these generate places for you from which you can draw skill, because your cultural origin is going to give you a leg up, if you will, on skill choices that you may not have had otherwise. Then finally, we come down to the idea of describing your state. And again, the state is a measure of the things that you hold valuable. In a way, they're sort of defining what you consider to be of worth for the purposes of your work in life. Do you measure your successes in terms of accomplishments, what you have done, what kinds of awards you've won, what kinds of certificates you've earned, what kind of classes have you advanced? This is one way of doing accomplishments. Sales records, sales objectives, management goals, personnel objectives. These are all ways that you can determine your state. Perhaps instead you're more concerned with the way things are in terms of appearance. Maybe you're a gardener or a painter or a sculptor. Your idea of what is valued is determined by what you have left in your wake in terms of that which is beautiful or charming or aesthetically pleasing. Perhaps you're based on economics, how much you made, how stable your income is, how well you are protected towards inflation or the future, etc. Maybe you're doing it from the standpoint of emotion. How insulated are you from pain? How willing are you to step out on the perimeter and help someone else in need? Maybe it's heritage. How honored have you been towards your family? How much do you take care of your ancestors and their challenges as they get older? And of course, ultimately, education. How much have you spent in terms of dollars and cents and structure to become knowledgeable, and how do you hold that? And in each one of these, you open up an entire new framework for things that you might have learned in life. And when we come down to the building of a persona, or how to build our character, our inventory of skills that we have at our fingertips naturally adds to and expands these possibilities. So let's talk a little bit about those. So when we talk about the very panoply of skills that you might have to include in your persona, in your character, if you will, there are so many as to be just about impossible to get the fingers around all of them. But there are some gauges for determining what your panoply of skills would be. And so we're going to talk about what kind of things you can hold as actual skills, and how you can acknowledge them, and how they can be added to your skill, and really to get your fingers around what are measurable. Now, you need to have those that can be acknowledged not only in terms of tangible value, but also, more importantly, that you can have them acknowledged by other people that you have them. One of the biggest challenges when you are speaking of an imagination and a creative world set is that you tend to fall into traps where you allow yourself to believe things that don't have a root in reality. And this is probably, in the greatest extent, why people say to, quote, get real and grow up and put away the childish creativity. But the reality is that there are many, many things that we do that can be acknowledged by others simply by seeing and acknowledge that we've done them. For example, I've been a storyteller for 49 years plus, and this can be verified by you talking to anyone that's ever met me ever, and they will all tell you that I'm a role player, that I'm a game aficionado, and I'm a storyteller, and I have been for all of my existence. That's a measurable skill. So if we have at our basis that all of our skills are things that need to be acknowledged by others, then the list becomes easier to attain because we can look at what we've done and think realistically, is this something that I've done where there were people that could validate that there's a way for us to ascertain whether it's a real skill or whether it's just a pie in the sky wish. And not that there's anything wrong with wishes, we'll talk about those in a little bit. But the first thing we have to look at is what hobbies and activities do you currently pursue? If you are a golfer, do you consider the skills that you have as a golfer as something that holds value in life? You certainly do to some extent because there's a rather high cost to playing golf as far as the number of clubs you have to own and the courses that have fees that you have to pay to go and play on. And even the balls themselves have a numeric value that you have to be willing to pay to lose because you're going to either wear them out or lose them over time. That's just the fact of the matter. So when we're determining your panoply of skills, we want to pick up some of those skills from the hobbies. But they may not be the actual skills that you are necessarily only holding for. Maybe you're talking instead about, for example, in the case of golf, you have a skill in travel, walking. I have a friend of mine who's paraplegic and doesn't have the muscle strength to swing a golf club. But man, get him on a video game version and he can keep up with you all day long. We played several different games of golf with friends, and the reality is that the skills that we have can be narrow or broadly described. And so when we talk about taking the skills from our hobbies and activities, they can be simple things like understanding trajectory, hand-eye coordination, ball control, hand control on the club. There's a million different skills that might be put together to make a specific hobby. So it just gives us a gateway, if you will, to start to discern what true skills we have. And the next one, and this goes back to the imagination, what is it you wanted to do? There's a villain in the Babylon 5 series that Mr. Morden constantly asks, what do you want? But I'm going to say to you that the idea of knowing what you want is a good indicator of what you might have a talent in, because the mind reaches for things that are possible and only makes them impossible or improbable when we choose to not follow them. So what you want to do may very well be what is important for you to do. And of course, this will come out as with the experience and, of course, the development of the skills to more narrow form. And we'll, of course, speak with that on a later episode. But what did you do if you performed any military or civil service? Are there skills that you picked up even in that? The skills of personal discipline, of collectivism, working together on projects, the understanding of social identity and location, cultural identity. These are all skills and abilities that can be translated to your persona, the actual description of who you currently are, in a realistic way to give you an idea of what skills you could advance and what things you might want to work on to become the persona you want to be in the future. Another one is an untapped opportunity. Sometimes the world makes recommendations that we choose to deny, but the very recommendation might be something you want to consider from a skill standpoint. For example, when I was a young man, I took one of these aptitude tests, and it came back that I told me I should be an air traffic controller, or I should be a police dispatcher, or I should be a plumber. And that third one kind of struck me funny. It's like, why would that be on the list? And as time went by, yeah, maybe I'm not the best plumber in the world. I can, fix a pipe or whatever. But the very understanding of how systems work makes sense for an air traffic controller and a plumber because they both are basically keeping things flowing, right? They're both maintaining the concept of order and structure. And so realizing that the skills we have may not be directly relatable doesn't mean they shouldn't be at least considered, because at some point, if my occupation fails me, at least I can go fix a pipe someplace and maybe make a couple of dollars. Now there are places in our lives where an educational fast track will come along. Either we are particularly good at a sport, so we get a scholarship. We're particularly good at singing. My son actually got a scholarship when he was in high school for college on the basis of his vocal talent. He was a singer and he sang with a community singing group, and he's awesome and could have, that might have been a direction he might have gone. So the idea that we can follow our skills down in educational fast tracks, something that jumps in our way, sometimes is there for a reason, and we are intended to follow a course we didn't expect. Maybe we have natural skills. Maybe there's things that we do. You know, the old I can tap my head and rub my tummy, and then rub my head and tap my tummy. These are all little weird things that we might be showing a skill in that will change our lives at some point, because we have it on our list of potential skills, and we might find that's something we want to develop. We might have particular things that are supported by our family. For example, my dad was in sales, and I had learned the I can't even remember what it was called now. The persistence poem. It was just a silly little poem, but I learned that because my dad was in sales, and that concept of memorization and presentation and speaking in front of people was a natural extension of a skill that was provided to me, if you will, by my dad and his support for my ability to speak in front of people. And although he's not with us any longer, he would certainly be proud of my ability to get out in front of people and to speak my mind, because it's something that he always desired to do and simply didn't have the direction in his life to accomplish it at any large scale. We also have our cultural tendencies, and that is the places where we live, the people that we are among. As a role-play gamer, I'm in front of game players a lot, and having the capability of communicating and sharing their game's experience to reach them in ways that perhaps others might not is definitely a gift that was provided me, and it allows me to share what I know because of the culture that I'm within. These are my people, so to speak. Next is the concept of curiosity and experimentation. Sometimes we don't know what we want, and the only thing you can do is try. If you think you can, or if you think you can't, you're right, as the saying goes. And reality is what we want to do sometimes is measured in what we're willing to do. This also leads to the idea, now going back to pure imagination, maybe there's things in your life that you would love to do on a fling or a whim, and they really are things that you've always searched out doing, but were intimidated in some fashion and prevented from pursuing. The idea, therefore, is that you should give them a try just to figure out whether or not they are for you, because some of them are actually triggers that will bring you into alignment with what you're supposed to do. And ultimately, regardless of which one of these you want to follow, realize that there will be a natural fire inside. There will be a drive that we all ignite when we endeavor to attempt, and when we find any modicum of success, we see that's where we might need to be, or where we should be reaching in the future. And all of these are ways to start to put together kind of the chain storm. We've talked before about the change storm element, and this is where it comes in. Because if you throw out on this wall board in your mind, if you will, all the things you might do in the world, if you do it in a brainstorm methodology, it'll be like shooting at a sky full of stars. You're going to be shotgun blasting all around and not getting any traction, any growth. Whereas if you throw a couple of rather expert chain shots in a certain direction and you start to link the pieces of your life together to see how they merged to put you in the direction you're going, it will help you kind of laser focus on what your direction in life should be. A very good friend of mine and my mentor, Maurice Domino, used to always say that every one of us has $1,000,000 message. There's something within you, something that you need to say, something you need to express that's worth millions. We just have to figure out what that is. And one of the ways to do that is we start taking these chain shots and building our chain storms to start to create this formation that we can then start to use the domino principle on. We'll go more into the domino principle perhaps next week. But the idea of building the course from where you are to where you want to be in a way that others can see and therefore help you achieve it. So we will talk more about that in the next week or whatever. Just realize that we are now driving towards your participation in the role-play game of Nycos Launchpad that is in your life, so that we can drive you from where you are to where you want to be, where you need to be in the future. Alrighty, so now we've talked about how it's like a role-play game. Now let's talk about how it's not. The concept of Launchpad is that we are building a mechanism for role-play where we can start to build that vision of where we want our persona to end up. But the scoring is going to be more objective. It's not going to be a matter of what we have achieved, what we have not achieved, what we are looking for, what we haven't found. Instead, it's going to be what improvements have we made along the way. Are we closer than we were before? And if so, how much incremental growth, and how realistic is that numeric value for determining where our next objectives would be? Remember, there's an old phrase, and this probably hasn't been promoted nearly as much as it was when I was a youngster, but the idea of it's not whether you win or lose. You can say the rest if you want. If not, it's how you play the game. Where our position in the world is not a matter of did we win or did we lose? It's whether or not we played in a kind fashion, in a fair fashion, in a just fashion. So we need to look at it from the standpoint of how we played the game. Your success, therefore, is determined by your alignment. Now, those of you that are role-play games have now knee-jerk responded, I'm sure, to that terminology, but I want to clarify what I mean when I say alignment. The alignment that we should have is that we hold people as most valuable, events as being valuable, the outcome from the events to be valuable, and then finally the things that it took to get there. This structure, putting people first and things way to the bottom, is essential to being the better person. The very idea of building the character that's going to give you this persona, that's going to give you a structure for building it, depends on this alignment, that you're focusing on how you can help others and help you can work to support people over events, outcomes, and things. Because when you do this, then the joy that you will have in your life will be derived not by the result, but by the very act of doing these good things. When I'm giving players joy, when I'm producing a world that they can engage with and watching them interact and feel their victories and feel their successes in game, there's nothing better for me than that. So if I could find a way to do that for you in your real life, imagine how effective that would be if you were able to turn around and be able to replicate that and still others. So the idea here is not to focus on the result of our objectives, but instead on the very act of doing them. And this is because if we look around in the world, there's no one that's judging our worth. There are people that would. There are people that would draw lines and say, you are being successful or you are being a failure. But they are, how is it my grandfather used to say it? Those who mind don't matter, and those that matter don't mind. When we do things, when we grow, the people who matter are going to care, and those that don't care, they don't matter. They just simply, you're wasting your time to worry about them because no one else is measuring your worth. They're measuring what their valuation of your worth is, but that's not the same thing. Just realize that means that you are therefore your own worst critic. In a game mechanism, your opponents are the ones who judge whether or not you are a good sport, bad sport, good player, bad player. But it's in your own best interest to play the game as honestly, fairly, justly as possible, because it leaves you with a positive experience and the joy, as I said, that you can derive. It also means that you're not only going to be your worst critic, but you're also going to be your best student, because who else is going to listen to you if not yourself? And while this sometimes leads into what is perceived as negative cycling, that's an issue of simply considering your thought processes and determining whether it's proper thinking or what my grandfather would call stinking thinking. And to realize that the real rewards in life are our own personal advancement, and the Nycos Launchpad is a way to measure that advancement and therefore see your progression, and that personal advancement becomes its own reward, because in most cases the only way to ever really lose is to quit, because if you are behind in a game, you simply have to tighten up, button up, and dedicate yourself to a greater performance and simply learn from your mistakes. And all of this leads us down to the idea of advancement and growth in life. And many of those people who are advocates for the concept of a prosperity gospel or whatever, they simply say, feel a certain way and you shall receive. And that's not what this is about. This is about building a mechanism for metering out the successes you want, figure out what steps you need to take to achieve them over time, and how best to align your objectives with your principles, and therefore ascending towards your objective. So then the next question is, why not do this alone? Why would I want to join someone else in doing such a thing? If I can do this on my own, if I can build my own course, then why don't I just do that? Well, here are some examples of reasons why you want to do this as a group or want to join with people such as the Nycos Launchpad people. Our crowd is really about growing everyone's objectives. It's mainly for this. If you are involved in things in your life and you have a success, if you're doing it alone, there's no one that's going to tell you you're doing a good job. You're not going to get the affirmation or the feeling of knowing that you're accomplishing without having someone else that can acknowledge it. And in the case of a Launchpad group, what I call a team play group, you have the collective that are going to be your cheerleaders. They're going to be as happy for your successes as you are, because it's going to validate their very processes as well. Now, I'm not saying this in a way of anybody profiting off of anybody else's successes. That's not what I'm referring to. There's no hierarchy of return of investment or anything like that. All I'm talking about is that if we're all playing the same game, we're all seeing the same obstacles, and we can help each other overcome them. That means that our struggles can be shared. I got a typo there. That's awful. Can't believe that. There we go. A live on-screen editorial change. Yes, your successes and struggles can be shared. If something is going dynamically wrong, perhaps mentioning it to someone else will give you a new perspective. Maybe you'll hear some advice. Maybe just simple acknowledgement of it can actually help. I know that in many cases, when I have a difficulty, just stating the difficulty to the universe seems to be somewhat advantageous because inevitably somebody comes along and helps. One of my grandfather's favorite jokes is that if you ever get lost in the woods, make sure you took with you a deck of playing cards, because all you need to do if you are ever lost is just sit down in the forest and start playing solitaire, because as you're playing along, eventually someone's going to come along and tell you put the 10 over on the jack so you can move the 9, and then you can ask for directions. Okay, so I know it's just a joke, but the idea here is that the sharing of the struggle itself can be cathartic and also can help trigger a solution within ourselves. Not only that, a community that is working together towards advancement will evolve. Perhaps there will be those that come into the organization or into the community that are the rookies, but because they're dedicated to the process and moving rapidly through it, they soon become the very trainers or helpers for those that are have been struggling for a longer period of time. The idea, therefore, is that the community evolves as the players join. The more personnel that are involved in the decision-making process, the more effective the decision-making process is, and the more useful perspectives become available. This also means that your tasks can be handled together. Maybe there's something that you're working on that 3 other people are working on. This is, I think, one of the effective purposes for discussions like weight loss or dietary changes or improved physicality. The idea that we can overcome the challenges because other people are facing the same ones, and we can build up a better understanding of how to resolve it. Personal goals can be expanded because as you find out that you're not the only one who's trying to, say, help with the homeless situation, or you're wanting to help with providing food to people with difficulties, you're able to therefore step in and start to take possession of those larger goals by sharing the smaller goals with other people to where it becomes a larger one. And this communal process also tends to give more fuel to the fire, more enthusiasm and excitement to the advance that persons are making as they are moving towards this objective. And it also ties into the very concept of the play of the game, because when we are working on a team, we automatically feel the competitive nature start to rise up, and perhaps we're both working on the same thing, but then we become challenged to do as much or more, or do things differently or faster or whatever. And this competition, this co-opetition, if you will, the cooperation within the competition, starts to create the more dense feeling of being involved in the game. One of the things that I find particularly interesting is the essence of the paraclete. In the biblical tense, there is the description of the Holy Spirit, and it is, at least in one place in Scripture, I think it's in Romans, it's referred to as the paraclete, a Greek word that means one who walks beside us. And the idea here is that if we are on our way to a goal and we've shared the goal with other people on our team, and we have explained why this goal is important and how we can assist others through it, then suddenly we've got people that can walk alongside of us and go, you're getting there, you're attempting it, we're with you, and therefore you get this stronger feeling of the community that arguably religious groups fight for all the time. They're looking for this concept of unity. And if we are playing a uniform game and that we are all part of, and we're playing at our own speeds and we're playing with our own objectives, we have the ability, therefore, to cross those lines from time to time and engage with those who are perhaps not on the same, not exactly on the same goal path as us, but they certainly are playing the same game. This also will open us, once we start to hear about other people's activities and the things that they are pursuing, we can start to see how our gifts and talents might be explored in working with them towards their objectives. Perhaps a person that we are talking with needs some of the things that we have as our natural skills, and we have the opportunity to step in and assist them. And of course, there's going to be some give and take, some quid pro quo, some affiliation or association that will ultimately assist us in reaching our goals and along the way. Now, this isn't meant to sound so much as a socialistic scheme where system where we are giving according to our abilities and taking according to our needs. Far from it. Instead, we are all endeavoring to become the best of who we are, to fulfill our character roles, and in the process fulfill other people's objectives as well. So just think of it as a way of exploring what you might be able to do in ways that you might not have considered before. If we do these things, we start to find the barriers between us dissolving, because the places where we don't agree tend to fall away in favor of the places where we do agree. And I know that there are a lot of subjects out there that I could point to and I could get counseled for in the world today because of positions that either I am holding now or I have held in the past. And these points of difference start to dissolve when we realize that we're really all playing the same game. We are all living the same world. We don't have a special lane that'll take us out of the game. We have to play the game with everyone else. Furthermore, this very idea of sharing, particularly when we're talking about sharing in vulnerabilities, we lead ourselves to understanding. It wasn't until the loss of my daughter in 1997 in a car accident that I began to understand so many different topics were not important. There were so many things that I considered absolutely essential to life that after her passing didn't mean a whit. And it took a long time to come to grips with that, I'll be honest. But the barriers will dissolve once we're all playing. I know that this is true because it's fundamentally how I was able to adapt and survive after that loss, as well as the loss of my marriage and the loss of the extended family, et cetera, that occurred in the tailings of that devastating loss in 1997. But these barriers that dissolve give us openings and the ability to begin understanding. And this sharing of the vulnerabilities leads to understanding because we see how many other people are engaged in life, hitting exactly the same boundaries and barriers, but in a different way. And seeing the juxtaposition helps us to build our own domino wall, as I said before, and I'll talk more about that next week. Domino wall that will lead us away from this devastating loss towards our inevitable success. And I say inevitable, and you'll understand more as we go along, but the idea and the potential is that we build the idea of our character that we were wanting to build towards, and we begin to role play as if we are going there, because in doing so, we start to develop the mindset, the energy level, and the enthusiasm that we need to be at to actually live that new life. And this really leads to an essential thing that I don't know if I can share sufficiently in a short video like this, but confidence can be contagious. I know that I am going to be achieving. I know that I've got my goal on what I want to accomplish, and I'm going to be sharing that over time. And as I move towards it, I'm going to be bringing you with me because I know that your lives can change in the same way, because I've been playing for 50 years. I've made it this far. I've got levels of joy that are unparalleled. Nobody can touch it. And the reality is that getting here, getting to this place of acceptance, understanding, and awareness of others it's staggering. It's not some place that I would have ever gotten to had I not faced the challenges that I did. And then ultimately, all of this comes down to safety and security is in numbers. When we're all playing the same game, how can we become adversarial? We're playing the same game. Yes, we can be upset if somebody is ahead of us in the winner or loser categories, but remember, those are subjective, and we choose which one of those we want to honor or hold valuable. And if we're holding somebody else's success as something to strive for, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because then it gives us the impetus to drive ourselves forward, which even they would agree is a good thing to get us moving in the right direction. So I'm going to calm down, because I get to this point and kind of begin to get excited and lose my focus. So before we get there, I do want to thank you all for being here for this episode of NycosRPG and the Nycos Launchpad. I hope that there's been some pieces of this that have been helpful to you. I want to thank you for the time you spent with us. If you like what you see, make sure you follow us here, and also check out our channel at YouTube. That link will be placed on the website below. I believe it's already there. And if you check out our website check out our YouTube page, make sure you give us a subscribe and a like over there. It doesn't cost you a penny, but it helps to get the word out to others. In the meantime, I want to thank you again for being here on Twitch, and let me share with you our quick contact page. If you want to know more about the Nycos product line, check out NycosRPG.com. That has product info and the information on how to purchase our merchandise. We also have NycosRPG.info, which is the story, lore, and so much more that you can pursue to find out more about the world of Nycos and the adventures that we run on a weekly basis. You'll also want to check our Discord, and that's down below. You can join us and communicate with me directly and become part of our community. And for more information on how to become an actual participant in the world of Nycos, check out patreon.com/join/Nycos, NYCOS, and we will see you join and be part of our community in the future. I want to thank you again for your time, and have a great night. Talk to you soon.